now call on George Adam to be followed by Jean Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I take this opportunity to commend the European External Relations Committee for all their work in producing this report, and convener Christina McKelvey for dealing with the issue with her usual passion and vigour. TTIP has been one of the biggest issues dominating my mailbox in discussions at local meetings in recent times. Like many of my constituents, I have been concerned by the lack of information to date on the proposed Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, particularly with regards to public services. We all have stories of how the NHS has helped us personally or helped family members and friends. A universal free at the point of need National Health Service is a cornerstone of our society, which must be protected with every fibre of our being. To that end, I intend to speak up on behalf of my constituents, voicing their concerns, and I join with the First Minister in saying I will fight tooth and nail against any moves to privatise the NHS in Scotland by the back door, and if the TTIP agreement ever put that threat, it would be opposed strongly by the Scottish Government. The United States is an important market for Scotland, and this has been mentioned during this debate today. Around a third of all whisky distilled and bottled is bottled in Paisley, and obviously that has a knock-on effect for me with local jobs as well. But anything that would make exporting a national drink, or indeed any of our exports, would be welcomed. As already has been mentioned, exports to the USA account for $3.9 billion, which is 14% of Scotland's total international exports. But this cannot be done at the expense of lowering of regulatory standards in production and quality. Products carrying the logos of Scottish farmed salmon or Scottish beef, to name but two, are trusted in this country and around the world for being quality products and being prepared to the highest standards. Any move to lower or remove regulation could tarnish our national brands and lower international exports. This ties in with my next point surrounding the investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS. I believe it is one of the most alarming elements of this. Foreign companies operating in Scotland would be given the powers to dispute with our government, even sue it, out with the framework of our national court system. I do not want to see a situation when a US tobacco firm can take action against the Scottish Government if it chooses to legislate and introduce plain packaging in cigarette packets. This decision would be made by a nationally elected representatives in the public interest. However, if TTIP includes this provision, that said US tobacco firm would have the ability to go over the heads of the Scottish Government and seek to reverse this decision. France and Germany have already voiced major concerns over ISDS, and regardless of which party leads the UK Government next week, they will need to take a strong line on this issue. Yes, I will.
John Finney.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the member taking an intervention on the point. Does he also agree that the ISDS mechanism suggests that whilst the civil law of this land is good enough for you or me, we need some super-duper one for the corporations?
Adam?
I would think we have to ensure that the laws of these lands are actually registered with these companies, and these companies will be brought to task. And this is one of the reasons why ISDS is such an important element of this, because it is effectively taking away the laws of this land and allowing these companies to dictate to the democratically elected government. But it is imperative that the UK Government represents the interests of all component parts when negotiating this deal, not just the interests of one part or big business. Remember the respect agenda. There was much said about that in recent months. It's more important than ever that the next UK Government takes on board the concerns of the Scottish people. Unfortunately, the current UK Government has a poor track record in speaking up for Scotland at a European level. Our Fisheries Minister, Richard Lockhead, has had his hands tied behind his back, while Scotland has received less than half of the UK European Fisheries Fund allocation, despite 87% of UK landings coming ashore in Scotland. I hope we will have a strong group of Scottish MPs elected to speak up for Scotland in the next UK Parliament. A major concern of my constituents has been the lack of transparency in the whole process, and this has been mentioned by other members during the debate. As with any negotiations, I appreciate that aspects will be discussed behind closed doors before a final proposal is drafted, but it appears that this negotiation process has caused real anxiety among regular people the length and breadth of our country. Recently, a discussion on TTIP was removed from the agenda of an Agricultural Council of Ministers meeting in March. Instead, it was discussed in private. This does not fill me with confidence with regards to perceived transparency. Richard Lockhead urged the Council and Commission to be more transparent in forthcoming discussions around TTIP and asked that it remains a topic on future agendas. I welcome the publication of key documents and position papers on the negotiations by Commissioner Malmstrom since she took up the post of Trade Commissioner, and I encourage the Commission to consider the European Ombudsman's recommendations on how to improve transparency and engage with stakeholders. The main issue, however, and the focus of much of the correspondence I have been receiving on TTIP centres on the NHS. I was pleased to read in the SNP manifesto that we will seek to an explicit exemption for the NHS and Scottish Water as part of the general public sector exemption from the terms of the proposed TTIP. With the increased privatisation of the NHS in England, Presiding Officer, we need to be more cautious of any attempts to allow private interests into the NHS in Scotland. We must make it absolutely clear that the NHS in Scotland will remain in public hands and will remain free at the point of need. The shameful use of the NHS by other political parties during the recent election campaign has been a sight to behold, and the weaponisation of it, but it makes it even more crucial that the Scottish Government retains full control of our NHS. The best way to allay our the public's concern over the threat to our NHS is to have a double lock enshrined in the TTIP. Yes,
members in his last minute. I'm sorry, members in his last minute. Forgive me.
Unfortunately, Mr Finlay, but the best way is to have the double lock enshrined in the TTIP agreement, which explicitly exempts the NHS from scope of TTIP and respects the Scottish Parliament's devolved responsibilities. There is this word again, Presiding Officer, respect. Both European Parliament and UK Parliament must respect the democratic will of the democratic elected Scottish Parliament and allow it to operate the NHS. Just this morning, Presiding Officer, Stacey and I, my wife, were talking about our MS and how our treatment and care within the NHS has improved dramatically since she was diagnosed in her teens. This is MS Awareness Week, so now more than ever I want to talk and defend the NHS. But I would challenge, Presiding Officer, both Labour and Conservative MMPs. In closing, Presiding Officer...
No, you must close now, in fairness to others.
At this stage, I would like to ask my colleagues to stand up for a right to keep the public services in public hands.
Thanks so much.